Good evening. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you this evening to the William G. McGowan Theater, and a special welcome to those of you who are joining us on our YouTube channel. I don't think there's anyone in the room who doesn't know that the midterm elections were Tuesday. And we now know, except in a few cases, those individuals whom the voters have chosen as stewards of our democracy for the next 2 years. This year's midterm election saw some hard-fought campaigns, especially for seats in the Senate, and records set for the amount of money spent on campaigns for both the House and the Senate. Our guest tonight will help us make sense of all this in a few moments in a program we've entitled Congressional Drama, Midterm Election Analysis. This is our 6th year in partnership with the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress in presenting this program. I'd like to thank Barbara Kennelly, President of the Association, Dennis Cardoza, past President, and Pete Wickline, the Association's Executive Director. I think it's fitting that this program take place here at the National Archives, for we play an important record-keeping role for Congress. Our Center for Legislative Archives, located here in this building, holds the official records of the House of Representatives, the Senate, and legislative branch agencies and commissions. It's a total of about 500 million pages of records and more than 50 terabytes of data. Please note that we don't hold the personal papers of members of Congress, which are the property of each member. We have an active loan service sending House and Senate records back to the Capitol Hill for use by congressional committees. We typically send more than 1 million pages a year back to the committees. We provide research assistance to a broad array of researchers interested in congressional records, and we produce educational materials and programs to advance public understanding of the history of Congress and representative government in America. Before we move on to our program, I'd like to tell you about 2 other programs coming up soon here in the McGowan Theater. Next Wednesday, November 12th at 7, we'll welcome Ivy Meeropol, granddaughter of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, to present her film, Heir to an Execution, which is about the execution of her grandparents for espionage during the Cold War. After the screening, her father, Michael Meeropol, will join her to discuss the film and answer questions. This program is presented in conjunction with our exhibit, Making Their Mark, Stories Through Signatures, which runs through January upstairs in our O'Brien Gallery. The next day, Thursday, November 13th at 7, we'll present the 10th Annual McGowan Forum on Communications, and the topic this year is White House Press Secretaries. The press secretaries to President Ford, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Obama will be on hand to tell us what the job is like. And NPR's Michelle Martin will moderate the panel. This program is generously supported by the William G. McGowan Charitable Fund, Inc. If you want to know more about these and all of our programs and exhibitions, there's a monthly calendar of events, and there are sign-up sheets in the lobby where you can receive it in regular mail or email. And another way to get more involved in the National Archives is to become a member of the Foundation for the National Archives. The Foundation supports all of our education and outreach activities, and there are applications for membership in the lobby also. And a little-known secret that I keep telling everyone, no one has ever been turned down for membership in the Foundation for the National Archives. I'd now like to introduce Dennis Cardoza, past President of the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress, who will introduce tonight's guests. Mr. Cardoza is a 6-term former Democratic member of the House from Michigan. He served on the House Armed Services Committee for 12 years and was chairman of the Investigations and Oversight Committee and ranking member on the Research and Development Subcommittee. He also chaired the House Oceanography, Great Lakes, and Outer Continental Shelf Subcommittee for 6 years and was on the Coast Guard Subcommittee. He also served on the former House Select Committee on Aging and its Health Subcommittee. Please welcome Dennis Cardoza.
Thank you very much, Archivist Ferriero. We've had such a great program over the last decade with the National Archives. And with the archivist, we can't thank him enough for all of his help in our partnership over these past 5 years. And on behalf of the former Members of Congress Association, I want to thank all of you and welcome all of you for our discussion. We certainly had an interesting evening 2 nights ago. following the midterms unfold and seeing which races were going as predicted and which one were surprises and trying to discern what it all means. One thing that we're sure of, we're going to have more former members in our association. As a former member, I know that the day after the election really is just the first day of the next election cycle, as we can all see from watching the television shows and the commentators. So looking at the results of the midterm election inevitably leads to a conversation about the run to the White House and how the parties are positioning themselves for that campaign that is now officially kicking off as they talk about what happened in the last election. And, they never talk, though, about the predictions that were wrong. They just kind of move on. It's like being a weatherman if you're a political analyst. Who better than former members of Congress to give their insight into how this new Congress will work or will refuse to work with the President during his last 2 years in office, and what the mood of the electorate means for those who were just elected and for those who hope to be elected in 2016, and how many of the major issues that concern the voters on Tuesday, ranging from the state of the economy to the threat of ISIS, how those issues will be dealt with here in Washington. We have a very impressive panel for you tonight, and after an initial panel discussion, we will give you plenty of time to ask them directly about some of the things that I just mentioned that you're concerned about. And let's bring them out on the stage now, starting with our moderator. Lauren Duggan is Bloomfield Government's Director of Legislative Analysis and contributes to BGov's Congress Tracker, which he helped develop. He was editor of Congressional Quarterly's House Action Reports, providing summaries and analysis of legislation. And he also contributed to CQ's legislative tracking services and product development during his decade there. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for chairing our panel this evening.
Thanks so much. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for coming tonight, and thank you to our hosts, the National Archives and the Association of Former Members of Congress. I'm Lauren Duggan, the Director of Legislative Analysis at Bloomberg Government, and I'm very pleased to be in conversation tonight with 5 former members. I'll introduce them briefly. Their full biographies are available to you in the program. To my immediate right is Barbara Kennelly, who represented Connecticut. To her right is Tom Davis, who represented Virginia. Then we have Martin Frost, who represented Texas, and Marie Buerkle, who represented New York, and Dennis Cardoza, who represented California. All are now in the former member category. And I guess my first question for you is, how many of you are glad that you're on the former camp, or how many wish that you were in the active camp going into this brave new Congress? Show of hands, anybody?
Well, which one? I mean,
How about the former camp?
yeah, I'm happy to be where I'm in a good place. I'm in a good place.
And would the rest of you like to still be in the fray?
Well, I had a good time when I was in Congress. I was in Congress for 26 years. It was an interesting job. My district was eliminated in one of the great redistricting efforts, and so I did not have the option of remaining. Having said that, I've been out 10 years. I think it would be a very difficult place to serve right now. I don't care which party you're in, but I had a good time while I was there.
I miss it. I really do, but I was a fortunate woman. I was on the Ways and Means Committee. Things got done. I can remember being exhausted trying to do reform of Social Security, then reform of taxes, and we did it. And we worked together, and it worked. And from what I heard, the new majority leader in the Senate say, yes, see, it could happen again.
So I left undefeated and unindicted, which is the way you want to get out of the place. I had a gavel. I was a committee chairman, but frankly, it was just time to move on. I really enjoyed my time there. I'm a lot better for it. I hope the country's better for it. But there's a time for all things, and it's time for me to move on.
I felt my time was cut short prematurely of those darn elections. But I will say that serving in Congress, then the reason you miss it is because of your colleagues, all of the good that you can do for the constituents in your district. You can really help them, regardless of what's going on in Washington, you can help them. And it really is just an absolute honor to serve in the Congress and the House of Representatives. There's just no other way to say it. It's a true honor.
I agree with all my colleagues, except that I'm in the Tom Davis camp. I left by my own free will. In fact, I didn't quite finish out my last term. I left a couple months early. But it was a tremendous honor to serve in Congress. And the thing I miss, I get asked the question a lot, what I miss about Congress, or do I miss Congress? I miss working on behalf of my constituents. But most of all, I miss my colleagues of both parties that I had great relationships with.
And I could notice tonight in the green room and up in the reception beforehand, this kind of reunion when you see each other. It's kind of a special experience. The title of tonight's program is about congressional drama. And I'm wondering, a lot of the talk in the last 48 hours has been about, can the parties get along? Is there going to be this fight? If you could go down the road, tell me, do you think there is optimism here for some sort of productivity, or are we really in for 2 years of battle? And of course, we'll talk about more issues throughout the program, but in general.
Well, having run for Congress many times, and these gentlemen and women ran for Congress just recently, and they heard what was being said. People were absolutely disgusted that nothing was getting done and that it wasn't a functioning body. So I would think if I were back there, even no matter what party, I'd say maybe I should get something done and go to, in fact, future majority leader in the Senate yesterday said he wants to go back to regular order. And that's when things did get done. And the rules of the Senate were very good, because what they did was, the way they're set up is that the Republicans now are in charge. They would obviously be in charge and be doing the rules, but there was a fairness for the minority party. And if he's sincere about that, I think things could work. Another thing, I think, having got that message out, the people of this country got that message out that they were so unhappy with the Congress as it is today, I would think both parties would think that they should at least look like they're getting along, but at least get something done, because they both want to go into the presidential election in good shape. So, I mean, this is their opportunity, both sides.
Well, I agree the parties want to go in with good shape. The 2016 election campaign began yesterday, just for those of you who are watching it. And I think the leadership will make carefully calculated decisions as they move forward in terms of, is this in our interest or is this not in our interest? I'm not a particular optimist at this point. I think strong leadership can overcome kind of the macro factors that are keeping things apart. But look, you've got a lot of funded super PACs out there that have their own agenda. They can drop a dime on a member like this in a primary. You've got media models that thrive on polarization. You've got single party districts where members, really all that matters is their primary election. The general elections are nothing more than constitutional formalities. And those pressures make it hard to get kind of the compromises and for leaders to deliver even when they can get it together. So I'm not particularly optimistic, but I'm hopeful.
Tom and I have just written a book about Congress, about how it got in this particular state, and we have some suggestions for the future. There will be an event in this venue sponsored by the former members on January 21st.
Keep going.
I just want people to be aware, if they decide to come back on January 21st, Tom and I will be here to sign books. Now, to answer the question, I think that the environment is very, very difficult. I don't think it's just because we have a presidential campaign coming up. We have presidential campaigns every 4 years. I think we do need strong leadership. As a Democrat, I have a good bit of admiration for Mitch McConnell. I think that he will be a very capable Senate leader. The problem he's going to have is that some things in the United States Senate require unanimous consent. And he has one member of his party who says he's from my home state, Ted Cruz. He's not really a Texan, he's a Canadian. He was born in Canada. Who may refuse to grant unanimous consent and frustrate the leader of his own party, or may extract some things from the leader of his own party that will make it more difficult to accomplish things. Having said that, Speaker Boehner has had a tough time dealing with the Tea Party. He has more members now. Maybe he'll have a critical mass that he can just tell the Tea Party to go take a hike if they're going to take extreme positions. That remains to be seen. We don't know. This is a very, as Tom has indicated, for a variety of reasons, right-wing and left-wing media, polarized media, safe districts, and to add a point to what Tom said, it's not so much that people actually are going to lose primaries. They don't lose very often, but they change their voting pattern to prevent a loss. So a Republican will be looking over his or her right shoulder at someone more extreme and will change his voting record and move to the far right, and that makes it more difficult for there to be compromise. in the middle. And a Democrat, likewise, will be concerned perhaps about someone running from the left in the primary, and will also be less inclined to compromise. Somehow, we have a suggestion on how to remedy that. I'll leave it to the, you can read it in the book, but we do have a suggestion on how to get more centrists elected to Congress, and how to make it possible for people to meet in the middle. Right now, that is very difficult to do, and I served in the House with Pat Roberts. I happen to like Pat Roberts. He's a very good guy. He was threatened within an inch of his life in the Republican primary in Kansas, even though he was a longtime senator. And so he changed his voting record and moved far, far to the right just to be able to win the primary. He won the primary, and then he had a very tough general election for a variety of reasons. But there are a lot of people like that who live in fear of a primary challenge. Not that they're going to lose in a primary. It still doesn't happen very often, but that does affect the inability of people to meet in the middle.
Thank you. I'm optimistic. I think that the American people spoke loud and clear on Tuesday. The state governor's races, I think, were a real clear indication of what people are looking for in addition to the House and the Senate. I think American people are concerned about the economy. Maybe on paper things look better, but they sure don't feel it. The data is not consistent with the way American people feel, with their salaries, with their incomes, with their opportunity, and with their kids getting jobs as they graduate from college. And so that was a real palpable issue in this election. And so if the House and the Senate work with the president, they can pass the Keystone Pipeline. That's got bipartisan support. That's jobs, that's energy, that's a great way to start off. They can reduce the corporate tax rate in this country, get rid of some of the loopholes. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. They can reform the tax code. There are things they can do where there's bipartisan agreement. They can look at the Affordable Care Act, the medical device, the tax on small medical devices, bipartisan support to repeal that piece of it. Look to where there was bipartisan support before they couldn't get anything through the Senate, and work with the Senate to work on those pieces. If they can just jumpstart this economy, if people can begin to feel optimistic about their lives and their kids' lives and the opportunities that their kids can have, I think we will see a better feeling in Washington and a better feeling out in the United States of America. I think right now on a whole lot of levels, but I think primarily with the economy and jobs, there's sort of just a depressed feeling like, my goodness, this economy is just chugging along. Growth, post-World War II, growth was 3.3% every year. Now we've been averaging about 2%. When President Obama first took office, it was negative. This whole mess that was going on in the economy. So I am optimistic, and I think there's a lot of places where there was bipartisan support before. They can go back and get that bipartisan support, and I'm hopeful that the president understands this is what's on the American people's mind, and he'll do something about it.
I'm thinking about that as a young person. I've been watching politics for over 50 years now. And in fact, something most of the folks in this audience wouldn't know, except for Martin, is I was his intern in 1979, 35 years ago.
My first term.
His first term. I got sworn in standing next to him in his last term of Congress. And when you start looking at the perspective last night, I sat back and I thought about the election in the following terms. First of all, this was a total repudiation of the president. And if you think about it, the Republicans didn't run to get a mandate on their issues. They ran on, we're not him, you got to watch out for him, he's got 2 years of unfettered control, and we got to stop him. That was basically the message. And frankly, voters responded to that. They were fearful of overregulation, overtaxation, over-meddling in a number of areas that they saw. And frankly, they also saw that things hadn't been managed very well. And people talked about Ebola and the ISIS crisis, but from my perspective, you start much sooner. When Mr. Obama got elected, my district was in the heart, just the middle of a crisis on foreclosures. We were the first area in the country to really experience massive foreclosures. Millions of people, millions of Americans lost their homes, and none of the government programs worked. And the economy and the slowness of the economy coming back has really been sort of a product of some of those economic policies that just never really got on track. Now, we're doing better. But even if you go back to the early days, Mr. Obama did not blame the recession on Mr. Bush. He said, I'm going to take responsibility for it. The other night, or a few weeks before the election, he said, this election is a referendum about me. Yesterday, his press conference really didn't say the same thing. I'll just leave you with one last thought. I talked to a member of Congress of my party, the Democrats, a few days ago, and he told me the following. The only people that are more angry than House Republicans at Mr. Obama are House Democrats.
Well, piggybacking off that, the relationship between President Obama and the Congress is going to be key to getting anything done. What is your impression of his ability to reach not just across the aisle, but even to members of his own party? Because even privately, when I talk to sitting members, they kind of have qualms about him not reaching out enough. Can he be a forward-looking person like that and make those kind of relationships work in the next 2 years? And why don't we start with you?
Well, I think my last comment really personifies it. He's not reached out. He's not, I go back to Martin's comment that Mitch McConnell can be a gracious and effective compromiser. And people don't, I've done several bills where it didn't become public that we worked together, but we worked on the Farm Bill together, we worked on a number of other provisions together, and he's someone that you can talk to if you take the time to talk to him. And the fact is that now, it's more difficult when you're the president and you're the leader because you're posturing for your party. That's a difficult discussion. Sometimes you have to lay the groundwork and the foundation. But I think if you want to get it done, you better start acting more like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan than President Obama and his leadership team. Frankly, the Democrats as well. He needs to really use Congress in an effective way. There's experienced leaders who care about the country there, and he ought to use them effectively.
Well, I think the president, and it's really stunning if you think about 2012, and my district, my district was upstate New York. There was a tsunami for the president, that kind of support. And in 2 years, how that has just 180 degrees gone the other way, so that we heard during this last election that candidates didn't want him in their district, in a district where he might not be popular. So it's stunning. And so you say to yourself, why? Why'd that happen? How could that have? And I think what Dennis was saying on, ISIS, Ebola, government not working well. The Veterans Administration crisis. I was a veteran on the VA committee, and I was chairman of the subcommittee on health. Whatever the VA wanted, we funded them. It was bipartisan. It was just to get the job done for our veterans, and that didn't work. So the American people, and I will say, they are not embracing Republicans because Republicans, as Dennis said, didn't really have a platform this time. It was just, we're not Obama, and we can make things better. And hopefully they can. But so the Republicans have a steep hill to climb, and they've got a heavy burden here if they're going to have any luck in 2016. But the president, I think he's been detached. He hasn't. When two Americans are beheaded, that's something where the president's got to have his head in the game. And I think that was kind of the American people are just, geez, we don't know what to do, but let's change and try something else.
You can't tell what's going to happen in the next 2 years. It is possible that President Obama will decide that he does want to have a legacy and that he will engage actively with the Republicans to try and pass some things. I think that's certainly possible, because presidents are all concerned about how they will be treated by history. I served with 5 presidents, starting with Carter and with Reagan, Bush Sr., then Clinton, and then George W. Bush. Of those 5 presidents, the 2, and a lot of the people in this room served with all those presidents, or some of them, the 2 best presidents in dealing with Congress, one Republican, Ronald Reagan, and one Democrat, Bill Clinton. The presidents can work with Congress, and it's not just the province of one party. I would hope the president is actively engaged. There are 2 issues that are of real consequence that will require presidential leadership. One is immigration. Now, the president has started off on the wrong foot by holding a red flag in front of Mitch McConnell, who correctly pointed out that he's waved a red flag in front of the bull, by saying that he will, if they don't act and get on with it quickly, he will do things administratively. He may well wind up doing that. I don't think he needed to lead with that. I think he could have said, I want to work with Congress, let's figure this out. Everybody knows what the ultimate solution is on solving immigration. It's been offered for years. The problem is that if any Republican member suggests that he or she might be considering voting for a compromise on immigration, the right-wing talk radio yells, amnesty, and the Republican member withdraws from the field of battle. This requires presidential leadership. We could take a lot of the people who are here in the country illegally, give them legal status, not citizenship right away, or perhaps even ultimately, but legal status. Certainly let their kids who were grown up here, who were brought here as infants, let them go to our schools. Maybe require they serve in the military, maybe not, but we can provide status for a lot of people who are currently in the shadows. And we can quibble about whether we send them to the back of the line and whether they can ever apply for citizenship, but there is a solution to this problem, and both parties understand that. And it will require a significant amount of leadership to make that happen. I often tell people that I was there in '86, the last time we passed immigration reform, and I tell people that immigration reform makes Social Security reform look like a walk in the park. It is the meanest, toughest issue Congress ever has to deal with because it's an emotional issue. The other issue is tax reform. Now, this is not going to be easy because while there are a lot of people in the business community that would like the corporate rate to come down from a maximum of 35 to 25, in order to do that, you have to eliminate a lot of current provisions in the code. And every current provision in the code has a friend, has a champion. I happen to represent a number of independent oil and gas producers, and their position is, they're not the major companies, their position is that they need some of the tax provisions so they can go out and attract the capital to drill wells. The president wants to take all their preferences away from them. The Republicans so far have said they want to preserve those, so can you have compromise on that? I don't know the answer to that. If you roll in individual taxes, also bring the top individual rate down from 39.6% down to 28 or somewhere in that neighborhood, then you have to get rid of a lot more tax provisions. Do you go after the home mortgage deduction? Do you go after the charitable deduction? This is hard and it's heavy lifting and it will require an enormous amount of effort, and I'm not sure even if the president is fully engaged and if the Republican leadership is fully engaged that they can pass tax reform. It took last time when we reformed taxes, it took 4 years. My state was at that time had a number of Democrats and a number of Republicans. Tax reform passed overwhelmingly, but a majority of the Texas delegation, both Democrats and Republicans, voted no because of its treatment of real estate. And in fact, it led to the savings and loan debacle in my state. So don't think this is easy, even if you have people of goodwill who try. They will try very hard, but I wouldn't bet very much on comprehensive tax reform being done in this Congress, even if the president decides he wants that to be a legacy issue.
I think the president is tremendously capable, articulate, charismatic, but frankly, making small talk with members is just outside of his comfort zone. I've seen this time and time again. It's just not who he is, so I just don't see that happening. He's certainly capable of it. He can be charming. I just think it's outside his comfort zone.
Well, I agree with Martin that he's got to think of his legacy. Every president thinks of his legacy. He's got 2 years, and so he should work at it. But the other thing that I think he has to be very, very careful of is the use of the veto. He should let this group get going. It's a new group, new leadership, well, not new leadership, the same leadership, but they got to adjust. So I just hope he doesn't come in and health care comes up and he gets all upset about that. There should be much more discussion. I think if he is set repeal, he will veto it. But there's time to, there's all sorts of subjects that can be looked at and changed in the health care bill. It's a huge bill. And to repeal it, it took us 15 years ago, we did health care, or we didn't do health care. Hillary Clinton tried to do health care and she couldn't get it done. But we took a vote on it then and it didn't happen. It took 15 years to do health care again. So I just hope that they can work that out, because this country needs a health care bill. The price of health care has gone terribly high. So I think he's going to have to control himself on that, because he feels so close to the health care bill. And it really is his greatest accomplishment. But to get back to the tax reform, Ken Martin's very, very right that it's a big job, and it takes a lot of work. But I would hope that the president, we had the treasurer of the country working right with us, Reagan's treasurer, working right with us during that tax reform. Tip O'Neill was totally involved in it when we were doing tax reform. As Martin says, it's a huge job, but I think it's something that could be done and could help the economy of this country. But the president, you say that he's not exactly the social butterfly with the Congress, but at least have people going every day, if we do tax reform, going there every day and trying to work it out, rather than say it's this way or the highway. He just can't do that, or things won't get done, and we'll have the same kind of nothing getting done, and then who knows, this country can't afford it with the economy we have right now. We've got to move forward. I'm glad Mitch said that we're going to have regular order. I think we've got to look at the things in the lame duck session. You know, people say nothing is going to get done in the lame duck session. This is a time to clear the tables of some of the things that are around, should be done, and then start fresh in the new Congress. Everybody has to make an effort, and I'll tell you who has to make an effort. The president's people, so many of them, just think that he's perfect and everything he says is right. You've got to have some people representing you that understand the issue and also are willing to compromise. And his administration people haven't been as forward on that as they should be.
In '86, Ronald Reagan, and I didn't agree with Reagan on a lot of things, Reagan had very competent staff who were actively engaged in tax reform. I mean, Marty was on Ways and Means then. They engaged in this issue. They helped work it through. This doesn't just happen. And it remains to be seen if the president has the kind of people who can work this issue. I just simply don't know the answer to that. It is really a heavy lift.
It's a heavy lift, but just like with the Affordable Care Act, rather than looking at it in its entirety, I think you've got to do it incrementally. And we saw with the Affordable Care Act, taking that approach, they just didn't have a handle on so many pieces of it, unintended consequences, the results, the rollout, all of the, you can keep your doctor, you can keep your health care plan, all of those things that really didn't happen. So I think it's smarter and certainly more prudent to take it just incrementally and look at what's first, what's the first thing we need to take care of, and then move on. Because then it gets to the point where it is just too big of a task.
When it comes
See,
to
I
that,
disagree with that. On tax reform, people wanted to vote once. They wanted to vote for a package and to not have to vote again on that issue. And I think if you're going to have tax reform, you've got to have a bipartisan package. People walk in, vote on it, and leave. They don't want to do it incrementally.
They don't want to read it either. They just want to vote yes.
Well, I'm just saying that that's not something, maybe other things you could do incrementally.
But
I don't think you can do tax reform.
You've got to prioritize the reform. You can't just say we're going to overhaul the tax reform. What are we going to do first and second and prioritize it?
Well, with tax reform, and I remember because
Barbara was on Ways and Means. Yeah.
I just came to Congress, and it was really an introduction to Congress.
Yeah.
But the tax reform is trading. You're trading this for that. You're trading this for that. And the way the trading has to end up is you've got enough votes from both parties to get the program through. And Martin is so right. By the time we had a full tax reform, just vote on it and let's not talk about it again. And you know what? It worked. It worked.
I voted no. but it did work. It passed.
In the House, it's not amendable on the floor. I mean,
That's right.
it's the package. You vote the package. You may get a substitute, but you don't get amendments on the House floor.
when it comes to
You still
the
voted no.
when it comes to the health care law, do you see any room for agreement here between the president and congressional Republicans where you can take back certain provisions of it in exchange for something else that the president wants?
They've repealed several parts of it already, the 1099s. I mean, you can go through some things already.
There are pieces, but it won't
the core
significantly
parts of
change.
it.
He won't.
No,
he won't.
that's a signature issue.
It's a signature issue. He's not. I was in the House leadership and got the last 4 votes or so for the bill. And when I look back, we tried to get things changed in the bill before we agreed to vote on it. Now, there were some problems with, we were doing it through a reconciliation process. The Republicans weren't cooperating. So, and frankly, I think they're as culpable about the deficiencies in the bill as the Democrats are. But the reality of it is that he wasn't willing to compromise a lot at that time at the end. He had gotten locked in around his core concepts, and I don't think he's going to waver from those core concepts even now.
Let me make one thing. I wasn't fortunate. I was out of the House at the time. I certainly would have voted against it. But one of the problems with the bill is it was the bill that passed was never intended to be a law. It was intended to be a bill and get it off the Senate floor.
That's right.
You had the Cornhusker kickback, the Gatorade, the Louisiana Purchase, all these special provisions. Nobody obviously read the thing. They voted it on Christmas Eve to get out of town. That's okay. We voted for a lot of stuff like that. I don't fault anybody for that. The problem is when Scott Brown won in Massachusetts, they lost their 60th vote and they couldn't even get it
take it back to the Senate. And so that got thrown in our face every time we tried to make a change.
Republicans wouldn't even give you technical corrections to it, right? They just
That's,
said,
that's exactly right.
Live with it.
And the blue dogs that I was a part of, who are almost an extinct species these days after last night, we did our level best to make changes that we saw. Many of the deficiencies that are being talked about now are things that we mentioned then. And we were getting pilloried from the right, from the Republicans saying, because they didn't want a bill. And we were getting pilloried from the left because they didn't like the changes that we were trying to make the bill better.
So because they had to take the Senate version as was, which was not intended to be a law, it was intended to be a bill, and they tried to change, but it had a lot of deficiencies, a lot of things didn't connect. There was a lot of problems with the bill. There have been some creative interpretations, and I think what the dilemma was, if we don't go with this, we're going to have to start all over again.
Well, we're never going to get anything. We're going to fail for a second time. It'd be 15 years to get back.
Yeah,
to
and so that was the calculus, but that's why the bill has so many deficiencies.
What you have to, excuse me, just one moment. What you have to keep your eye on right now, too, is that while the Republicans won the Senate and will have 54 votes, they don't have 60. And the reconciliation process, which requires only a majority rather than 60 votes, is not used very often. So assuming that a lot of these things are attempted through regular order, and McConnell says he wants to do regular order, the Republicans are going to have some Democratic votes to pass the Senate. And if the president were to veto legislation, then the Republicans would have to have 67 votes to override a veto. And that's hard to do, quite frankly. So there is reason, if you really want to achieve something, there is reason to compromise.
That's right.
There is reason, because you've got to get to 60, and you've got to then have 67. I was a part...
But if you want to make a point, you don't need that.
No, but if you want to legislate. Now, I took a lot of grief. I generally voted with Clinton on many issues, but I voted to override the president's veto on a piece of legislation that was very important to the accounting profession, because I thought that the people were using RICO against people in the accounting profession where it was not intended, and that was a hard vote. But the President Clinton vetoed the bill, the reform bill, and we overrode it in both the House and the Senate. But don't think that wasn't hard to do. It was a close thing. So just because the Republicans have 54 votes in the Senate now, and they have the largest number in the House that they've had since the 20s, don't think it's necessarily going to be easy for them to pass everything they want to pass. It won't be at all. And they're going to have to trim their sails. They're going to have to talk to Democrats, and they're going to have to talk to the president if they want to pass something rather than just making a point.
I do want to say, though, about the Affordable Care Act and the issue whether or not it's the president's legacy and it's his signature bill, and whether the House Democrats and Senate don't love it or hate it, Republicans, the American people don't like it. The people do not like this health care reform in its current state. So that's the issue that's got to be addressed. There's so many pieces of it that some may say, well, let's start over again. I would guess that what they'll do is probably start with a repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and the House and the Senate will vote on that, and then it'll go to the president, who'll veto it. Then they go back to the drawing board. Then they go back to the tax on small medical device. Then they go back to health savings accounts. They go back to all of the things that the American people have been complaining about that they've lost or that it's deteriorated since this law was passed, and they begin to make changes that way. But the true matter here, and as elected officials, The American people aren't happy with this healthcare reform in its current state.
The public
The
does-
hospitals aren't, the physicians aren't, the healthcare professionals aren't. There's no tort reform in it, which is, the crux and one of the leading drivers of the cost of healthcare. So I think we got to be realistic in doing what the American people want.
The American people, however,
Many people, I'm going to do it, Martin. I think many people have signed up for it. We have found some very good things in the bill. And if you go to the veto and it can't get overridden, I think, I promise you, if we don't let this go through with improvements, absolutely with improvements, you will not see health care reform done for another 15 years, and that would be really a shame.
The American people does like the fact that we ended the exclusion for pre-existing conditions. I mean, somebody who, you had a family member who had cancer and they couldn't be insured. I have a very, very conservative cousin, conservative Republican cousin in Dallas, Texas, whose wife came down with breast cancer. She survived. He was a small businessman, and they could not get insurance except at an exorbitant price. And my cousin, my conservative Republican cousin, said, Martin, why can't you do something about this? Why, we want to get insurance. We don't want to have to pay an enormous amount just to get health insurance. And you also had people whose adult children under the age of 26 didn't have jobs and they were out of college and needed insurance. There were some very good provisions. We're not going to change those basic provisions.
Well, and I don't think we have to change those provisions. They're good provisions, although New York State already had pre-existing conditions. You couldn't deny for pre-existing conditions.
You sure as hell could in Texas.
Yeah.
Well, but so if there are good pieces, we've identified good pieces, why can't you keep them? Why can't you,
I was going to make the point that the American people didn't like the previous way healthcare was being administered either. And there was a clamoring. There was 70% of America wanted a healthcare bill. The problem is they didn't agree on what kind of healthcare bill they agreed on as well. When you look at the numbers of people who don't like the current healthcare bill, about 30% wanted single payer. And so they wanted
They were
something.
to the left.
They were to the left. You had another 35, 40% that didn't want what we got, and then you got some folks that are happy because they've gotten some things in this bill that make the situation better. I will tell you that in retrospect, if I still had to cast the last 4 votes or round up the last 4 votes, I'd do it again. But I would advocate and try and build partnerships to fix it. And it was just a travesty that we couldn't do it right the first time, and we couldn't take more time and legislate. And frankly, we should have been talking across the aisle to, like my colleague here, we should have figured out a way and taken more time to get the bill done right. That was the greatest mistake that we made in that whole effort.
I'd be interested to poll people just in terms of premiums and whose premiums have gone up and who haven't. And it's interesting to dialogue with the American people about their experience with it, because there are good pieces about it, and we do need health care reform. But as Dennis said, I think.
Well, Emery, premium's going to go up whatever you do, and now the Democrats own it, and I'm happy with that, so it's fine.
Anyway, you got some other questions?
Some other questions, absolutely. We mentioned tax reform as a possible area where you could get some bipartisan agreement. I'm wondering if there are other areas, maybe international trade, giving the president trade promotion authority.
I think TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, ought to be a natural. Republicans are generally free traders. They don't like the president. But this is a strong business interest group, and I think if the president comes and asks for it and works it, he can get it. He'll get enough Democrats and enough Republicans to join through. I think that's low-hanging fruit.
Just so we understand that it's unlikely the president's going to get a majority of Democrats, but he doesn't have to have a majority. He has to have enough
Clinton
Democrats.
didn't for NAFTA. For
enough, NAFTA passed with a minority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans. The same thing with China trade. There are some very strong forces inside the Democratic Party who are opposed to fast track, opposed to these trade provisions. Also, there are some Tea Party members inside the Republican Party who also don't like these trade deals. So you've got kind of a Duke's mixture here, and to pass it, you've got to get enough people in both parties, more Republicans and Democrats, but enough people in both parties to actually make it happen.
Well, there's a lot of talk about having a bill that gives the countries, the companies that are going abroad, to give them lower taxes if they come back here. Now, and that money would be used for infrastructure, for roads and for bridges. The idea sounds very good. The only problem is they've tried it to a certain extent before, and it didn't work. The money didn't appear in, the companies got the lower tax rate, but the money didn't appear in the roads and the bridges. But if it was written correctly, I think that would be a good thing. If we're having the highest corporate taxes in the world, of course, why would all our companies want to go over there and have lower taxes? But I think this is something that both sides could agree on and write a good bill.
I think energy, as I mentioned earlier, the Keystone XL pipeline, I think that's an area where there's agreement. Energy development, freeing up more land for exploration, for fracking and for oil production. I think that's an area, the more independent this country can become with its energy policy, the better, and that creates jobs. It also reduces the cost of energy for homes and cars, and so that's all good. I think regulatory relief is another area where we really have to look at regulatory agencies and what they're doing to businesses in this country, and I don't, the large corporations, I've now become a regulator. So I'm over at the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And you can see the large companies, the Mattels and the Hasbros and the Walmarts, they have compliance people. They have the infrastructure and the organization to deal with regulations. It's become a way of life for them and their compliance. But it's the small businesses. It's the independents who can't even figure out how to get through and navigate through this system of regulations. And the regulations are constantly changing. And they don't just deal with CPSC, they deal with EPA and 10 other agencies, and they're regulated that way. So I think regulatory relief, the REINS Act was passed out of the House. I hope the Senate will take it up and give these businesses some relief from all the regulatory burdens that have been placed on them.
There is, and I want to go back for a moment about the idea of compromise. I was a member in 1996. In fact, I was chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in 1996. And Newt Gingrich on the one hand and Bill Clinton on the other hand struck some compromises during '96. They agreed on a minimum wage compromise. They agreed on a welfare reform compromise. And Gingrich kept the majority in the House, and Bill Clinton got reelected. So it served the interest of both parties to compromise. Now, can you do that today?
That was triangulation. It was everybody's interest. Now you're dealing with a lame duck president, so it's a little bit different. But, sure, it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. But Democrats have an interest in having a chance to win the next presidency. I will with Hillary, assuming she's the nominee. So Democrats have an interest to be reasonable. This is such a fascinating political process that we're involved in. Tom and I, again, and you'll see this in our book, we've talked about
When was that?
January 17th, 21st, excuse me, January 21st. We talked about the new normal, and Tom wrote the chapter on the new normal, and you may want to talk about that because it actually is very real.
Well, I will, since you asked.
If you insist.
Look, divided government has been a normal in this country since 1980. Almost 80% of the time we've had divided government. You have a House of Representatives right now that its structure is structured advantage Republicans. Democrats got 1.4 million more votes for the House 2 years ago than Republicans. Republicans still had a 17-seat edge. They've increased that margin this time. The reason is because they controlled more seats at the redistricting table. Yeah. But also the Voting Rights Act and residential sorting patterns favor Republicans, election of Republicans. But you also have on the presidential level, when you look at the structure of the Electoral College, it's advantaged Democrats. You've got 6 states now that have voted Democrats 6 straight times for president, which is a trend to me. It's 242 electoral votes. We call it the blue wall. Republicans have had a hard intent. Voters threw them out with a vengeance in the midterm. So, you have some swing voters that don't like one party because they tend to overread their mandates as well. So I think we're in for a long period of bifurcated government, divided government, and sometimes you get a rhythm to governing, and we did in the Clinton years. Sometimes you don't get a rhythm for government. We're not in a rhythm right now, but it does offer some possibilities.
Tom mentioned the blue wall, and in presidential elections, you're going to see if we were talking about earlier immigration reform. If immigration reform isn't put on the table and taken off, I think you're going to continue to see.
It's a high wall.
It's a high wall, and it's only going to grow bigger. There were some projections that, I don't know if this will be the case, but there were some projections based on Hispanic growth of population that Texas would be a blue state within the next 10 years.
Don't
Now,
hold your breath.
and there's a
But it's
reason for
turned
that.
Colorado, I mean, Colorado,
very-
There's a
Arizona,
reason.
Texas
puts
is a
Arizona
very
in
hard
place.
state.
There's a lot of
Nevada.
folks in California that for the first time are possibly going to lose. 4 Democrats are up to lose their in the House in California, mainly because Hispanics did not turn out to vote. We would register them. I'm from California. Mr. Costa is in the fight of his life right now in a Central Valley seat because there was 33% turnout generally. His polling was based on 44% turnout, and the Hispanic population probably turned out in the 12 to 15% range.
That's always been low turnout.
It is. His prior district was the same way. It was a little bit southern and before he took over sort of my territory. But in elections where they care about, where they see immigration as a possibility, the turnout goes way up. And that Mr. Obama's first election, the Hispanic turnout really came up. And the second election, the same way, I think it was almost 72% of the Hispanic population voted. Now, if you look at the way they say that they care about other issues, Catholic issues, economic issues, that number gets a lot more narrow. But when they can't get their son, daughter, grandfather, whatever, to come and live with them in their old age or whatever the issue is, and they don't feel like people are respecting them, you're going to continue to see this trend. That's the reason why the Republicans should try and take immigration reform off the agenda right now.
Well, yeah, except when I listened to the president yesterday when he spoke, he was very clear that he is very aware that he has promised to do immigration reform. Not once, but twice. And if he doesn't keep this promise, his legacy with Hispanics are not going to be good. So I think he is, and as you know, Mitch McConnell said, well, you take immigration up like you're talking about, it's like putting a red flag, as we mentioned earlier. But I think the president is going to go forward with immigration reform no matter what.
Well, I just think it's really cynical to do this after the election, where people don't have a shot at it, and you do it afterwards. I don't know why they didn't do it the first 2 years when you had the majority in both houses, and 60 votes in the Senate, we could have gone away with it. But I agree with Dennis, if the Republicans don't get this monkey off their back, they're losing the largest growing segment of the electorate, and not just Hispanics. Frankly, Romney pulled worse among Asians than he did Hispanics last time. This is affecting, I think, a lot of groups in terms of their attitude. You need to be a welcoming party to be able to win. I mean, wouldn't you rather join a church that's welcoming in converts or a church that's chasing out heretics? You'd rather be the former. And a party comes off as a non-welcoming party when these issues get to the fore. They're better off, I think, resolving it and moving on.
We're going to move to audience questions in another minute or two, but one of the things Mitch McConnell was talking about yesterday after the victory was making Congress, or at least the Senate that he'll be in charge of, work 5 days a week and have votes on Fridays and probably Mondays and the weekend if it's necessary. Do you think that the culture of Congress itself needs to change? More open rules in the House, more deliberative process in the Senate? Would that help the political process at all?
I'm going to start with that, if I may. Every speaker since Newt Gingrich, Pelosi, Hastert, the current Speaker Boehner, they've all said we want to go back to regular order, and none of them have done it. And the reason they haven't done it, because they want to be able to write legislation in the Speaker's office. They want to be able to get things done a certain way. Mitch McConnell has a different situation in the Senate, and maybe he'll be able to have some semblance of regular order in the Senate where they actually do take up amendments, they do vote on things. It's very hard for the House to go back to a more open procedure. I was on the Rules Committee my entire time in Congress. There were times when the Democratic leadership came to the Rules Committee and said, we don't want all these embarrassing votes. We want to close this down. And the Republicans did the same thing. So don't count on the House of Representatives becoming a pure democracy anytime soon.
Well, look, the problem is when you open the process up, it gets abused by the minority in the Senate and the House, no matter which party is sitting in.
It's messy.
Yeah, that's the reality. So you close it up so you can move product, so you can move a legislative product. But if you really want to make things work, bring back earmarks. Earmarks give
Tom,
members
I agree.
skin in the game. I'm serious. Doesn't
totally
cost
agree.
a penny. You bring it back, members have skin in the game, you give people a reason to vote for things. Right now, the easy vote is no. Ask how many appropriation bills have been passed since they did away with them. Everything is an omnibus now or a continuing resolution. It's a travesty. Earmarks don't have to cost anything. You set a ceiling on what you're going to spend. Somebody earmarks it. Somebody somewhere decides what projects get funded.
The executive branch.
Yeah, the executive branch or some local
Facebook
official gives it
bureaucrat.
to his contributors. I mean, you may as well, it's 150 years of tradition where congressional project designations. You bring it back, it's going to run a lot smoother.
But when you bring it back, if you do, members should have to put their name on earmarks in a
But-
committee
Well,
report.
the last two cycles, we had that.
Wherever you want it,
Make it transparent.
and they have to be only for their state or for their district.
A federal government or a state government agency or a city government agency.
But
municipality.
somebody within the, no, not just, it can be a defense project in their district.
Well, sure.
My college classmate, whom I did not know in college at the University of Missouri, Duke Cunningham, went to jail because he was earmarking things that had nothing to do with his district in California. Members should not be able to do that.
It helped his campaign coffers, though.
But
And
I was proud
Other
of the
coffers too, as I
his,
recall.
and his private coffers.
I was proud of the fact that I got an earmark to build a mass transit system in Dallas. It's called DART. And had I not gotten that earmark, Dallas would not have a mass transit
I can
system
top
today.
it. I did Woodrow Wilson Bridge. So, I mean, yeah, it was an earmark. It was an earmark.
Yeah,
You
I
couldn't
put
have
out a
got-
press release
You
about
couldn't
it.
have gotten it through without an earmark.
I can top them both. I built the University of California in Merced. So.
No,
But what I didn't do
Bring
it.
back the earmarks. We need it.
I didn't do it in secret. I put out a press release.
I was happy
Oh,
to
You know,
do it.
telling everybody that I'd gotten an earmark.
Could I say something before we go to the audience? You know, we're talking about what's wrong here and what's wrong there and what we can do better. But I'd just like to mention that we had an election. We had a big, important election on Tuesday. And Wednesday morning, we all got up and life went on as usual. I belong to a board that I travel quite a bit around the world. We are so fortunate that we have the system that we have and the Constitution that we have. And so it's not all negative. We all hope it gets better, but you know, we have the system that has lasted and is healthy and is there for us, and nobody's shooting in the streets.
If anyone does have a question, we have microphones on the other side. Use the microphones, please.
Could I ask those who are former members to at least identify themselves as
same.
former members so the audience knows that we're being asked a question by one of our former colleagues?
Sir.
Yes, hi. In the discussion about compromise, I feel like there's a sort of half or omissions, perhaps, omissions of truth as opposed to perhaps commissions of other things. You know, we saw minimum wage pass in a number of states, mostly red states this time around. I don't see anyone talking about a compromise on raising the minimum wage from the new leadership in Congress. If we're going to do fracking and building Keystone, does that also mean that we're going to also try to address the real science of climate change? If we're going to promote trade, which, as has been pointed out, deeply affects the folks on Main Street who were very unhappy about the lack of employment and the lack of a strong minimum wage, where does that fit into this equation? And finally, as it relates to affordable health care and immigration, if those are the two issues that are the legacies for the president, immigration hasn't happened, affordable health care has. You know, what reasonable expectation is there from Republicans who have made it very evident from the time the legislation passed that their intent is to repeal it, if not in whole, then bit by bit. So what compromise are we really talking about, and how much of this is just spin the day after the election?
Well, I think a lot of it's been, I think I said that at the outset. I'm not really optimistic, but I'm just saying the minimum wage. I've voted against every minimum wage that comes up. I frankly think the marketplace is better at setting wages than the government. Well, it's a job killer, and the CBO says it. But we can have that argument. But I did vote for it once when we put a package together with some tax cuts for small businesses, because it's an unfunded mandate on small businesses telling them what they have to pay the players. And if you give them the money to pay for it through some tax, that seemed to us a little fair. And so that's the kind of compromise you can get. It's not been offered yet, but that's how you get it. A lot of us just thoroughly don't think government's really good at telling businesses what they ought to pay people, how they ought to pay them.
I think, too, that there is, from a very selfish motive, the Republicans want to be successful in 2016. And the next 2 years, certainly the next year coming up, will be their ticket to doing very well in 16 or not. And so for that reason, hopefully they will work on compromise and understand. But I think we got to go back to the election. The election was a pretty clear mandate. The American people don't like things the way they are. And so the Republicans have got to work for compromise. They've got to try to work with the president. But the president also has to understand that there was a repudiation of his policies on Tuesday by the American people. And so somewhere, somehow, we've got to find that middle ground. But I'm optimistic the Republicans, because of their desire to win the presidency in 16, will work very hard to make that happen.
I really like your question because it really does show that there are two sides. And I want to answer your question with two different analogies. One is my dad and I used to own a bowling alley. All of our employees were minimum wage employees, except for the couple management people we had at the top. And I went to the state legislature and voted for the minimum wage increase. I voted for every one that I ever got in front of me. And my dad told me, kid, you're going to kill our business. You left, you went to government, you're going to kill our business. And he didn't talk to me for about 6 weeks. That was the best year profit-wise that our company ever made. Because who comes to bowling alleys but people who make minimum wages? And they had a little extra money in their pocket and they could go out on Saturday night and do something. The reality is that some people, CBO may score it that way, Tom, but I'll tell you, you guys used to get mad when we would say that CBO scored tax increases incorrectly too. The reality is that there are both sides to these arguments. And the problem is that we're not having a thoughtful debate where we can sit and talk like we're sitting and talking tonight and coming to the agreement that Tom mentioned, where if you think that there's going to be a bad onus on business for passing a minimum wage increase, you fix that as part of the legislative outcome. That's what we have to get back to, this discussion and a dialogue on trying to figure out what makes America better. And conversely, in my own party, you know, I voted for the climate change stuff because I think it's a real problem. I was the solar champion of the year. But when I look at the Department of Interior and some of the things they're doing on the resources side of things that are putting greater constraints, endangered species stuff, causing California not to be able to move the water from the mountains like they've done for the last 50 years. And we've got the vast Central Valley that provides the food and fiber for this country is starving for water, not to mention LA that doesn't even realize how bad their situation is yet. And there is a drought out there, but the worst problem is the man-made drought where we can't use the resources that we've built over the last half century the way they were designed. And our party is causing that problem. And so I think we have to have an honest discussion of what the problems are and what's good for America. And when we get back to those kinds of discussions, we'll have a better outcome and people will feel better about the elections. Tea Party Club that helped me get elected is already giving me grief because I'm not spending enough time communicating with them about what they want me to do. It's an ideology that is hurting the Republican Party, but even worse, it's hurting America.
But you know, we talk about the Tea Party to the right, but the left has the same.
I totally agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, this is and what we've seen in this country, and Tom mentioned it earlier, has to do with redistricting. There's very blue districts, there's very red districts. Redistricting has really made, my seat was one of the very few in this country that was a swing seat. And so there's a ton of money dumped into those kinds of races because they can move it. That seat has gone from Republican to Democrat to Republican to Democrat, and this time it's back to Republican.
The only difference between the far left and the far right is the Democrats believe in government, so they try and make it work. And the far right don't believe in government and try and muck up the process so it doesn't. And that is one of the differentiations between those two.
But what the American people are seeing, though, is yes, they believe in government, but government isn't working.
Oh, I don't disagree with that.
Can you think of if we're talking about having a single-payer system in this country, how has this country and CDC handled Ebola? How have they handled the Veterans Administration? How have they handled ISIS? So the American people are saying, even progressives, you got to take a step back and say, my goodness, I believe that government should be able to do it, but what's happening now is it's not doing it. And so then you're really in a quandary.
I mean, one of the problems is how people receive their information today. In the old days, we had, you had Walter Cronkite, or you had Huntley Brinkley, and this stuff was filtered. You may not like what they said, but the facts were really pretty universal. Nowadays, everybody's got their own set of facts. The internet, where most people get their information, the crap to content ratio coming over the internet with absolutely no filters on this is incredible.
In favor of a trade issue, and that is a trade promotive, and so U.S. government can advance TPP more aggressively, and Congress can pass the TPA maybe at the beginning of the next year. And on the other hand, there seems to be a few Republicans supportive to Obama policy without any condition. They don't like to promote Obama legacy, I think. There seems to be no suitable staff who can get along with the Republicans. And so in the staff of White House. And so what do you think about the future of the trade policy, especially?
I think that if the president he submitted nothing to Congress, okay? And I think he didn't want to before the election because he has a labor base that's going to pick him apart that they're trying to get rejuvenated. I think if the president goes with TPA and asks for it for Congress, he will get it. They may put some limitations on consultation and those kind of things, which are normal. But Republicans are generally, as a general rule, very, very strongly pro-trade, and you can't have a trade agreement without trade promotion authority because nobody's going to negotiate with you if it's going to be subject to amendment in the Congress. So I think if he asks for it, he will get it. I think that's low-hanging fruit, and the rest of this stuff is just rhetoric.
The president wanted it, and the Democratic leaders in both houses asked him not to send it up.
Right. Sir?
Hi, an observation and then my question. Get to come to a lot of these with former congressmen and former senators, and you all make more sense, it seems, when you're out of office. Now, what I'd like to say is maybe we should get a constitutional amendment that says you serve for 2 years, you get out, and then you come back. I don't know. Seriously, I mean, if you think
Don't
about it.
wish that on me. I've served
I realize that. Well, I am because you kind of stole a little bit of my question. But my question is, if we were holding this in the 18th century, way back when, we think everything's new, but it's not. Jefferson and Adams would be arguing, calling each other hermaphrodites or whatever they did back then, which they actually did. But there are two new things that I wonder, and I wanted your thoughts on them. And I'm just going to call them M&M for something lack of that, and that's money and media. You alluded a little bit to media, but with the 24/7 news cycle, and everybody is a reporter, and they're kind of different issues, but they're related. And while money's always been a part of politics, I don't think anyone had Bill Gates's money back in the day. They did have a lot of money, and I know it's relative. So, A, is it a problem? Are you troubled by it? And C, what can be done by it?
Well, let me start on this. Once upon a time...
It's in the book, by the way.
No.
Oh, well, then don't give it away. Don't give it away.
The 21st of January. Once upon a time, I was a journalist. I have an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Missouri. I worked as a newspaper reporter, as a magazine reporter. I worked on television before I went to law school and got involved in politics. So my basic orientation is in favor of a free press. I don't believe in censorship. What we have is a horribly complex situation now because of all the new media. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I trust the American public by giving them information. Those of us who don't like the information that has been disseminated are going to have to work hard to make sure our part of the story is told. Now, on the money issue, the United States Supreme Court, going back to when there was a Democratic majority on the court, has basically taken the position that spending money is a free speech issue, that you can't put restraints on the ability of an individual to spend his own money either for his own candidacy or now on corporations to spend whatever they want to spend, labor unions to spend whatever they want to, or wealthy individuals. The only way you could change that is to amend the U.S. Constitution, which is very hard to do. When I talk to high school and middle school students, I often point out the irony that we were a country founded by revolutionaries who established a very conservative form of government. They made it hard to change things. It's hard to amend the Constitution. It's hard to pass laws. Got to go through the House, got to go to the Senate, go to a conference committee, come back, be voted on again, go to the President can veto, 2/3 to override the veto. It is damn hard to get anything done in this country. Every once in a while, we kind of break through that and we get some things done. Now, what you can do about money, I believe, is to do what the Republicans 12 years ago said they wanted to do. At the time McCain-Feingold came up, and Tom and I both spoke against McCain-Feingold because it took money away from the political parties. The Republicans' answer was, well, let's have full disclosure. Now, the Republicans don't want full disclosure because they have all these right-wing groups who are raising money in secret, and they want to protect their donors. So there are some liberal donors on my side, too, who like being protected. So what you do is you ought to pass legislation requiring that anytime any group, any 501c4, which is a charitable group, takes an ad that mentions a federal candidate by name, that they have to disclose all their contributors. Right now, they don't have to do that. They have to disclose to the FEC when they make an expenditure, but they don't have to disclose who gave them money. And we ought to let the sun shine here. We ought to, if the only thing we can do to change the money situation is to have an abundance of disclosure and transparency. We cannot override the Supreme Court to put limits, to reimpose limits on what people can spend. That's not going to happen, barring some sort of major scandal in this country. But we can at least make the system more transparent.
I think you will see a move in this Congress to have a constitutional amendment that a corporation is not a person. Now, whether it can pass or not, I don't know. It's a long line to get that passed. But I think that should be aired so the American people can understand what's happening in the Supreme Court's decisions.
I think it's totally ironic that the only people that can't raise and spend unlimited amount of money are the candidates themselves to defend themselves.
Candidates and parties.
It's one of the reasons I decided to leave Congress, because when someone could come in and say things about me that I couldn't defend myself against, my reputation, my family taught me as a very young child that your reputation is one of the most important things, and you need to protect it at all points. And I would bet that big folks came in and spent a lot of money in your campaign where you got defeated. I know it happened to Martin, where people came in, spent huge, vast sums, said things about you that were totally untrue, and you didn't have the resources and the capability to fight back. That is not American democracy.
The irony is if you're a wealthy individual running for office, you can spend an unlimited amount. If you want to put $10 million of your own money into your own race, you can do that. But you can't. But there is a limit on what other individuals can give directly to your campaign committee. $2,600 for the primary, $2,600 to the general. However, a wealthy individual can write $1 million check to some PAC that's going to spend money against you, and then you can't raise the money, enough money to be able to answer that. The system has gone crazy. The system has gone bonkers, and I don't know. We'll do what we can. If you can have full disclosure, maybe that will help some, but we've got a very difficult system to live with right now.
I mean, what you've done is you've restricted candidates, as Dennis said, you've restricted candidates and how they can raise money, and now you've restricted parties under McCain-Feingold. And the question we asked at the time was, it's great to take this, quote, soft money out of politics, away from the parties, but where do you think it's going to go? Do you think this stuff is going to disappear?
We both raised that issue.
It started to seep back in with 527s, and then after the Citizens United case, it's out there in steroids. We have the worst system now that you can imagine, where interest groups have more power today than ever on this kind of thing. And it's just, I agree with you. I wouldn't want to get back in it because you have to kiss up to some super PAC and sign some pledge to get back in the game, and it just didn't worth it.
The interesting part about third-party expenditures, though, they can even, the people who support you can even work against you. You, by law, you cannot have anything to do with them. So the ad that they'll come in and run on your behalf, or the piece of literature they'll put out on your behalf, you absolutely have no say about. So it could be inconsistent with your campaign. You know, I took a position with my campaign. We're going to stick to the issues. We're going to be positive. I don't care about him. This is who I am. This is why I'm running. And, you know, the third party, the independent expenditures come in, and they're running ads, nasty ads against him, and you have no control over that. So it's just, it's
I'm going to tell you all
crazy
a
system.
funny story. how many people in this room know who Calvin Trillin is? Raise your hands. He's a nationally known humorist, writes for the New Yorker and writes for the New York Times. He's my wife's cousin. So in 2012, Cousin Calvin, otherwise known as Bud, wrote a piece for the New York Times about these new super PACs. And it was an interview, a made-up interview, a reporter asking the woman who was in charge of the super PAC about her super PAC. And he said, now, ma'am, people will think that you're coordinating with the campaign. And the woman said, coordination? What do you mean? And he said, well, you know that you're related. Oh, you mean I'm his mother? I'm the candidate's mother. And he said, that's right. And her response was, he never writes, he never calls. we don't talk to each other. And truth turned out to be stranger than fiction. In 2004, there were 3 widely publicized incidents in which the mother or some close relative of a candidate set up a super PAC and then claimed that that person had no coordination with the candidate. My friend Steve Grossman, who ran for governor of Massachusetts, his mother, Shirley Grossman, gave $100,000 to a super PAC. And she was quoted, they called her up and said, well, you know, did you talk to your son about this? Well, I didn't need to talk to him. I know what a competent, great individual he is. And then there was a case, so help me, this is absolutely true. There was a case in Florida in which a woman who used to be a man funded the super PAC of her son, who was running for Congress. And again, they called her up, and it's not him, he's a her now, and they said, well, no, I just bought some yard signs and put some things out because I believe in him, and we didn't talk to his campaign. And then there was another case, I'm trying to think of the third one, but there were 3 widely publicized cases in which close relatives, in an uncoordinated way, set up super PACs. So I was going to put that in the book, and so I emailed, I emailed Cousin Calvin, and I said, Calvin, do you mind if I quote your article and talk about this in the book? And he said, well, Martin, you know, truth is stranger than fiction. I wrote another column 2 years later about the shoe bomber. And I said, you know, the next thing we know, there's going to be an underwear bomber. And it actually turned out to be true. So you can't make this stuff up. That's the point.
Thank you very much for assembling yourselves here. I really appreciate the 50-year look that you had about what's been going on all this time. It comes to me that when I ran for county office in California many years ago, I had people who were asking me about long-term things that were going on, that were happening in California. And I really appreciated their, you know, 7th generation perspective. In the meantime, in these 20 years between, I've been involved in corporate relationships, trying to get communications right. And corporations, as I see in the last 20 years, have been becoming less and less interested in the future and more about right now. And what I'm asking this body of people is, if you look back on 50 years, do you have a sense of accomplishment that we have thought about the future? That we have really embraced what's going to happen in our country if we don't think long term?
Well, you get Sarbanes-Oxley. You have requirements now on quarterly reports. And if your quarterly report is bad, your stock goes down, you get a shareholders derivative suit. Again, it's the unintended consequences sometimes of government getting in, trying to do the right thing like they did on campaign finance reform, and just having these other things kick in that nobody thought about, or the market acts in a different manner. And I think that's one of the problems here. These corporate, I was general counsel for a public corporation. You live by the quarterly reports at this point, and you put money away from the future, you're subject to all kinds of other issues.
Hostile takeovers.
But Tom, that's not her question, though. Her question is, are there things that government is doing? She used that as an example, but are there things that government is doing now or in the future or in the immediate past to plan for the next 50 years?
Some agencies are, but let me just say, I mean, the long term to a president is 4 years. The long term to a member of Congress is 2 years. That's how long the terms go. And so we tend to be pretty short-sighted. But you have a lot of agencies out there doing some long-term planning.
But ironically, when you look at defense spending or something like that, you don't gear up defense spending. You don't put a new platform in the market or on the battlefield in 4 years. You got to be planning for 15 years out. And you're exactly right that we're not spending enough time. About the only people that are thinking about long-term planning are local public transportation agencies, and it's mandated in law that they have a P-STIP that goes out 10 years.
But in answer,
The bureaucracy.
in answer to your question, there have been examples, not in the last few years, but there have been examples within our lifetimes, our political lifetimes, where Congress has thought, and the public, our government has thought far out in the future. And those were things that were done on a bipartisan basis. Lyndon Johnson could never have passed the Civil Rights Act of '64 if he didn't have Everett McKinley Dirksen, a Republican, delivering Republican votes to break a Southern filibuster against civil rights. That was done on a bipartisan basis. Dwight Eisenhower, in a very clever way, built our national highway system by calling it the National Defense Highway System so that we can move our troops and our weapons around our country if we were ever attacked. That was done on a bipartisan basis. So we do think ahead. And there have been more recent examples. I represented the city of Dallas, which is now an overwhelmingly Democratic city, but when I was first elected, it used to be a Republican city. And we used to kid about the fact that Dallas, the business people in Dallas were progressive conservatives. If you asked them what they were conservatives. Many of them were Republicans. But they were always thinking 20 and 25 years out what was best for their area. We're one of the last metropolitan areas to build a new airport when we built the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. We built mass transit. That was done on a bipartisan basis. And if we're to do what you're asking, somehow we've got to get back to bipartisanship because you don't do most of those things just by one party.
And I think you have to add the corporations into this, too. I come from Hartford, Connecticut. We had the Aetna, the Travelers, big insurance companies. Now, those people, heads of those companies, they earned more than anybody else in town did, but they didn't earn what's being earned now. I think it's not only the government, but I think it's the corporate heads that really feel no responsibility to the system, to democracy, to make sure there's more sharing in the wealth. And I think that's one of the problems that we have, and that we've totally lost that community feeling. It's all about, now you look at the banks, I don't think, not too many, the way the banks advertise now is, look for another bank, because good luck with you with the bank you've got. I think it's a joining of government and the private industry for the betterment of the people in our society, and that's not happening right now.
But I have to, first to Tom's point about agencies, government agencies, I think many of them, because they're not subject to a 2-year election cycle in Congress or 6 years in the Senate, I think they're thinking more long-term, EPA, certainly FDA policies, and that's going to keep the environment clean and our drinking water safe and those kinds of, so they're thinking more long-term. Certainly our agency is. But to the corporate piece, I think corporations are becoming more and more, I would disagree politely and respectfully, that we met with a large corporation this morning. They give 5% back to the community. They're very concerned with sustainability and with the environment and making sure what they're doing is not taking and hurting the environment and polluting. So I think there's a lot of, they understand that they want, if they're going to be successful, they've got to be a good, as you say, a good community member. They've got a Walmart out in Bentonville, what they've done for that town, and giving back and the jobs they create. So I think I hesitate to demagogue corporations. I think a lot of them, not all of them, but many of them are doing the
I
right
want to
thing.
give you a very specific example about very courageous action on the part of a corporation. When the Minnesota Vikings running back, who who's from my state originally, got in trouble for child abuse, the Radisson Company immediately withdrew their sponsorship from the Vikings. There is a woman who runs Radisson Hotels. Her name is Marilyn Carlson Nelson. She's a Republican. She serves on a board that I chair. the National Endowment for Democracy. And when she did that, I called Marilyn and I said, Marilyn, you did an extraordinarily courageous thing for a corporation to do, to say we're not going to put up with this type of conduct by professional athletes, even those who are greatly admired in our town. And she said, well, you know, you have to stand for something in this world. And she took, I'm sure she got a lot of criticism because the Vikings are the hometown team, but she did the right thing. Corporations can do some very interesting and progressive, courageous things from time to time.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions at most, so maybe we'll turn to this gentleman who's been waiting.
First of all, thank you all for being here tonight. Mr. Cardoza, I'm currently an intern in Congress, so it's nice to hear you were once in my shoes. You mentioned the failures with CDC handling Ebola and the VA. I was actually just at work yesterday, had to read up on the legislation passed in July in both houses and signed by Obama in early August that increased funding for the VA and provided several attachments that basically increased oversight on the VA. But overall, what it was an increase in spending on the VA. My question is, you also mentioned how, you know, the difference between the far left and the far right being one at least supports strong government, the other more or less benefits from it failing. So yeah, I guess my question is, do you think that non-Tea Party Republicans have identified the fact that there is a flaw in that ideology when, how do I put this? When you, sorry, I wrote this down. It seems like the response to government failure has always been increased spending. And I'm personally tired of seeing the government fail. And I want to know if you think that non-Tea Party Republicans can see the ideology flaw and address it and perhaps actually try to compromise, rather than this Tea Party sort of mindset of let's just sit here and try to make this failure happen. Because I think the Republicans could benefit from identifying this far-right mindset as flawed. And, yeah. Sorry, I know that was very wordy, but...
Well, I'd like to address the oversight. I think, traditionally, oversight was the people in Congress making sure that the various departments are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Oversight now has turned into some investigation after the fact. I always love it when the Congress is going to investigate something. They're going to investigate something that we've heard all about, such as the veteran situation and how bad that was working. And oversight is really making sure that the departments and the cabinet members that have been appointed by the president are doing their jobs. You don't want to wait to hear after the fact that there's things such as in the VA that weren't happening. So I just hope this Congress comes and doesn't want to investigate something that's passed and starts investigating why some of our departments are not carrying out what they're supposed to be doing.
To your question, I do want to say, I don't think that conservatives want to see government fail. Excuse me. It's just that their solution to problems are different. They think that we should trust more in the American people rather than government. It isn't wanting to see one succeed or one fail. I think it's more of it's your philosophy. And so when you've got a progressive, their answer to a problem, well-intentioned, let's let the government do it. And conservatives, and you're talking about Tea Party Republicans, their answer is no. Let's let the individuals, let's let family, let's let community, let's not get the government, let's not put the government's nose in businesses and how they run and what they pay let's kind of let the market decide those kinds of things. And so I don't think it's a desire to see government fail, it's just a philosophical difference about the United States of America, what the United States is founded on, the principles. And there's two approaches. And the challenges for all of us is whether one approach is right or wrong, somewhere in the middle. And that's the challenge, somewhere in the middle. It isn't a question of wanting to see government fail. It's wanting to see government work better.
There's been a great vilification of the great bureaucratic class. And frankly, I think in the last few years, you've seen a lack of effectiveness in many of our agencies. I think that we have to get back to that great generation that made the country work. Frankly, we'd have never won World War II if we ran the government like we're doing today. And we have to get back to that kind of a mentality where serving in government is serving your country. And doing it right when you're serving in government is the personification of doing it right for America and the pride you take in your country. I know that's the way we served in Congress. And until we get back to honoring public service, whether it be on a city council or as a dog catcher or working in the EPA or in some other administrative function, we're going to get exactly what we expect out of that agency or whatever. We have to reward public service. And, you know, I know when I see a member of the armed forces, I know a lot of the folks here do the same thing, we thank them for their service. A number of us think, and frankly, I used to get a lot of people in my home district that would thank me for my service in Congress. And that is really one of the things that needs to happen. We need to get back, as a Blue Dog, we used to talk about fiscal responsibility, but also we would have meetings about trying to get Congress to focus on how do we get more efficiency out of government? How do we get more for our dollars? Just like when we go to, when you're in a business and you want to try and get more efficiency out of your investment or your infrastructure of your company. And that's what's going to make America great again if we can work together to achieve that. It's going to be tough. I hope you have a chapter in your book about that.
We'll take the one last question.
You know, if I could make one comment.
Sure.
Government does some really extraordinary things, not just winning a war, but there were people who were opposed to Social Security. There were people who were opposed to Medicare, that let the individual or let charities take care of our senior citizens. Now, no one would really, of any consequence in this country, would want to see us repeal Social Security or repeal Medicare, although there was great resistance from some people when those pieces of legislation were passed, that this is not something government should be doing. So there is a role for government, and there's a very significant constructive role for government. You can't leave everything to the private sector. You can't leave everything to individuals. There's legitimate criticism of the government overreaching from time to time, but government does play a very constructive role in our society.
The problem, and I just want one quick comment, the problem with like Social Security and Medicare is that yes, they are good programs and they started out with good programs, but what the government doesn't often do is go back and look at programs, and they've got, Social Security and Medicare have some real financial issues now, and if we want to keep those systems solvent and
There's
working,
no argument about that.
we have to address that, and the problem is,
But
as soon as you bring that up, though,
but there
then
were people
say,
who were opposed to the establishment of those programs because they didn't want government doing it.
One more question.
Hi, thank you. I understand, I believe it's true that there was a very low turnout.
It's hard to hear. Could you get close to the mic?
Yeah, I understand. I believe it's true that there was a very low turnout nationally in the midterm elections. And we've been talking about the mandate against Barack Obama. With this low turnout, do you think the mandate is against this man and his presidency, his policies, or the mess in Washington and the bureaucracy and the condition in Washington?
Well, let me take a stab. I mean, I think it's against all of Washington, but I think he bears the brunt of being the president. That is traditionally what has happened in midterm elections to Republican and Democratic presidents. We could go through the history of this thing. This midterm wasn't different than a lot of other midterms where the president's party loses seats, and you just have a lot of that. There's a 6-year itch. Democrats elected on his coattails with wind at their back now had wind at their faces. They faced re-election. So the Senate seats in an abnormal number of losses. But this is, in many ways, a typical midterm. This is a cycle that has been repeated in American history for 150 years.
And also, the sad part of it is, the main ones that didn't show up were the young people. I can remember when President Obama first ran for president, I said to somebody, my son is for Obama. They said everybody's son is for Obama.
Now they're looking for jobs.
Yeah, no, but now they did not come out. It's already, they're getting the figures, and young people did not come out at this election.
They voted with their feet.
No.
And if you,
Yeah, that's right.
when Bill Clinton only lost 5 seats in the House in his third midterm,
He gained 5 seats.
he gained 5 seats, that's
I
right.
was chairman of the committee.
You sure were. Sorry for the insult.
Yeah.
I apologize. But the point was the country was operating, his popularity was 63%, and people thought he was doing a good job running the country. If you do a good job, you can overturn those numbers. And what happened in this election, what happened 4 years ago when we lost the House of Representatives, where people voted with their feet. They didn't feel like that we had kept the promise that we had to them. And they weren't happy with the direction. And so there's two ways of voting in America. You can either vote no, or you can not vote.
Also, Dennis, there's been a lot of commentary about this, and it happens to be true. An off-year election, the electorate is older and whiter. Now, that used to be when seniors were voting for Democrats. That was okay, but Democrats have now lost seniors, and they have they're not doing well in the white community. They got 30, but the exit polls, Democrats got 39% of the white vote in this election this week. They've got to do better than that. But the deck is stacked somewhat against Democrats right now in off-year elections. Now, I hope we can change that. But the turnout dynamics are that young people don't vote as much in midterm elections. Minorities don't vote as much in midterm elections as they do in presidential elections, and it's pretty damn hard. Tom's right that the pattern has held over the years.
Yeah, 2006 was a pretty good off year for you.
Yeah, but that was unusual. That was because you had a very unpopular president, a president whose ratings were way down, somewhat comparable to the ratings of this current president.
Yeah, I think the parallels are pretty close.
Yeah.
But I will say, despite, and you can rationalize a little bit, voter turnout was low, it's going to be incumbent upon this Republican House and this Senate to listen to the American people and to be out there and to break down some of these barriers and to, the African American community is upset with the Obama administration. They're struggling. Their rates of unemployment are high. So there's just this frustration among the American people. And I hope, that the Republicans are listening and the president is listening so that the American people can get some of their concerns addressed. I don't think we can just say low turnout was the result, was what this election was about. I think the American people were speaking loud and clear.
Well, they didn't vote for the Republicans because of who they were. They voted for the Republicans because of who they were not. And I think there's no mandate there, but that was a check on.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks to our panelists. And thanks to our audience.
Thank you.
Thank you.